In January 2014, Coco and his grandfather were shot dead by an Ndrangheta hit squad, and their bodies burned.
Wants to receive communion. He wants to meet with Christ again. What do you say?
A few days later, Father Fritita found himself in a car heading to the hideout of one of Italy's most notorious fugitives.
He didn't tell me where he was going, but just to trust him, and that we were going to see Alieri. Alieri, I said. Good. A big fish, I said.
When Father Fritita entered a cottage on the outskirts of Bagheria, he found something that no one would ever expect in a Mafia boss's hideout. An entire chapel, complete with an altar, a holy water spout, bowls for the wafers, and cups for the wine.
He even had church kneelers. I was astonished. Where had he gone? And then I realized that other priests had been there and visited him. And before Mass, I heard his confession and those of 3 other men who were with him. I was moved. I was with these unusual people who were wanted men. But the spiritual aspect took over, and I enjoyed it. Above all, it was a very intense experience, because I could see what an experience it was for them. Just imagine, they stayed on their knees the whole time.
Alieri now goes to Mass in jail. He was arrested in 1997 and sentenced to prison for life. Father Fritita was charged with aiding and abetting a fugitive. He served time, but was eventually declared innocent.
Why should I feel guilty for going to see someone? I had the chance and I took it. I don't deal with the Mafia. I'd even say it doesn't interest me. I sexual morality, values, and make them into a framework for his own particular relationship with God and religion.
The Mafia bloodbath of the 1980s spurred the state into action. The centerpiece of that action was the Palermo Maxi trial, which began in 1986. The 476 men on trial were so dangerous that a special courtroom was built. I have to admit that just being here gives me goosebumps. This is Palermo's famous bunker courtroom. Now these walls are bomb-proof, and just over there was a passage that once led straight into the bowels of the city prison, so there could be no chance of escape for the defendants. But it's not the impressive architecture that makes this place so special, it's the sense of history. The bosses of the Commission, Cosa Nostra's ruling body, were put on trial in this fortress. And it's here that we learn their secret rituals. For instance, the induction into the Mafia is called a baptism. Most of the accused displayed some twisted form of faith. Men like Michele Greco, known as the Pope, who maintained that he was as devoted as any of the occupants of St. Peter's throne. When the judges retired to consider their verdict, he bestowed a chilling blessing on them.
Io desidero farle un augurio. Io vi auguro la pace, signor Presidente. A tutti voi io auguro la pace, perché la pace è la tranquillità e la serenità dello spirito e della coscienza.
E quello che vogliamo anche noi.
E per il compito che vi aspetta, mi deve scusare, signor Presidente. La serenità è la base fondamentale per giudicare. Non sono parole mie, sono parole del nostro Signore.
Francis is going to have a hard time convincing mafiosi that their version of faith is not buying them a ticket to paradise. Because for the Mafia, religion is about more than prayer books, altars and rituals. Every February, 1 million people gather in the eastern Sicilian city of Catania for the festival of St. Agatha. There are firework displays to see and traditional horse-meat steaks to eat. Some worshippers show their devotion by carrying giant candles.
The Festival of St. Agatha means everything to the people here, but it also means a lot to the Mafia. Now, of course, crime bosses are always attracted when there's a lot of money changing hands, but for them the festival represents an unmissable opportunity to parade their power and to make it seem respectable.
Chief Police Investigator Antonio Salvago has been monitoring Mafia activities at the festival for years.
There are a number of different Mafia groups in Catania, and for one of them to have the power to make the procession halt in a particular place is a way of showing that there and then it has control of the city. One leading figure in the Catania Mafia managed to divert one of the giant candelabras from the procession out into the suburbs, well away from its normal path. The aim was to ratify the Santa Paola Ercolano gang's dominance over a part of the city that has been their stronghold for a long time.
These photos were taken during the festival. Here the police identified two important mobsters carrying the saint's relics.
And in this one, there's even a mobster who's managed to climb up onto the carriage and take the place normally occupied by the priest. That's how the Festival of St. Agatha, the third biggest event of its kind in the world, became the first to be put on trial for links to the Mafia.
Nel corso delle vostre indagini avete anche intervistato l'allora vescovo di Catania. Che risposte ha dato?
Nel processo non abbiamo avuto un contributo.
In the trial, we didn't receive a clear reply from the then bishop, Bishop Pomerito.
Credo che ciò sia dipeso da quella sottovalutazione.
I think that was because, at the time, the church undervalued, seriously undervalued, just what a huge problem there is with mafia groups using religious festivals to bolster their authority.
Michele Bendisi is the Bishop of Monreale, the largest and richest diocese in Sicily. He's been threatened by the Mafia and has taken a stand against their infiltration of religious celebrations.
Here in Monreale, I issued a decree stating that members of the Mafia are not allowed to belong to the confraternities that organise festivals.
Ma la Chiesa è unita intorno a questa sua presa di posizione?
The majority of the clergy, as well as the confraternities, accepted it with good grace. But there has also been resistance. Often, it's not open resistance, but underhand. Usually, it derives from wanting to live a quiet life, to let sleeping dogs lie. Because many mafiosi are benefactors to the local church. Benefactors, above all, when they sponsor religious festivals, by paying for fireworks, for example. And often, because the Mafia has power over a city, it can be convenient.
The unholy alliance between the church and the Mafia was forged in the wake of World War II. The Allies had liberated Sicily from fascism, but the chaos of war and the naivety of the British and Americans enabled the Mafia to grab weapons, power and profit. One man, in particular, spotted an opportunity not to be missed.
Michele Navarra was a Mafia boss and a doctor to boot. He got on so well with the Allies that they gave him an exclusive deal to use their old military vehicles to start a bus company. Now that bus company is still today the biggest in Sicily. In fact, it's the one that runs between Palermo and Dr. Navarra's hometown, Corleone.
Corleone owes its worldwide fame to the fictitious Don Vito from The Godfather. But in Italy, it's been far more notorious as the home of Cosa Nostra's bloodiest family. When the Second World War ended, Michele Navarra was in charge here. His next move was to be political terrorism, an attack on left-wing peasants.
Immediately after the war, Sicily was divided. On one side, there was the peasant movement, made up of thousands of poor country people who had always dreamt of having a piece of land. On the other side, there were the big landowners who feared losing their ancient feudal privileges. These landowners turned to the mafiosi, who managed their estates, to help them hang on to their power. Michele Navarra, insofar as he was the mafia boss of Corleone, was the person to go to for the big landowners who wanted to stop the peasant movement by any means necessary.
The 1948 election offered Michele Navarra the chance to make more political friends. It was Italy's first national poll since the start of the Cold War. Voters had to choose between the communists and socialists on one side, and on the other, the Christian Democrats backed by the church.
Michele Navarra lined up with the Christian Democrats. And obviously this cemented the alliance between the Christian Democrats, the church, the mafia and the big landowners. Their aim was to thwart the Red Menace at all costs.
In Rome, Pope Pius XII weighed in, excommunicating all communists. In Corleone, as in the rest of Sicily, clergy and crime chiefs were united in their fight against communism and backed the same candidates.
Michele Navarra was a regular worshipper of this Corleone church and a generous benefactor. At election time, he raked in the votes for the Christian Democrats. So when he finally met his end, 96 bullets were found in his body. The church rewarded his lifelong devotion with a sumptuous funeral.
The church and the Sicilian mafia were bedfellows throughout the Cold War era. Their relationship survived the worst outbreaks of mafia violence. In 1963, a mafia car bomb killed 7 soldiers just outside Palermo. The Vatican demanded that the Cardinal of Palermo take action, but Cardinal Ruffini demurred. He described mafiosi as just common crooks and stressed how none of them went to church. He added, "In my many years of ministry, I've never been able to detect the slightest relationship between the clergy and criminals." He was wrong.
September 1980, two men came to this monastery just as the friars had finished celebrating Mass. All that witnesses could later say about them was that one was about 30, the other a bit older. They asked for Brother Giacinto. They were shown up to his apartment on the first floor. There, as soon as he opened the door, they shot him 5 times in the head. This was a murder that opened a window on a dark pattern of relationships linking the mafia, politics and the church.
The dead man, Brother Giacinto, was no ordinary monk and had a relaxed take on his vow of poverty. Francesco di Castro was one of the first journalists on the scene.
Viveva in modo facoltoso.
He lived a wealthy lifestyle, not at all like his brother monks. There were tailor-made clothes, French perfumes, bottles of whiskey, and a pistol, as well as 4 million lira in cash. A lot of money at the time. Brother Giacinto had a dense network of contacts with politics, with society, but above all, with the mafia.
Mafia, Christian Democrats and the Catholic Church, an unholy trinity that ruled Sicily for 4 decades. Take Vito Ciancimino, the first politician ever sent to prison for colluding with the mafia. For decades, he'd been the link between city government, the construction industry, and Cosa Nostra. In 2009, Vito Ciancimino's son, Massimo, decided to collaborate with the authorities. He explained what he'd seen and heard when he went along to meetings with his father.
Personally, I will never forget the time when we arrived at a bishop's residence near Palermo. We went in through a back entrance, and there we found Bernardo Provenzano and the bishop sitting, waiting to speak with my father.
Bernardo Provenzano would only be arrested in 2006 after a record 43 years as a wanted man. He was the political mastermind behind the all-powerful Corleone family.
It was a high-level meeting, but each of them knew the importance of the other, and this was also obvious from how they greeted each other, with hugs and kisses on the cheek.
Che rapporti aveva suo padre con la Chiesa?
For him, parishes operated in a similar way to local branches of the Christian Democrat Party. The parishes had to be financed. My father built a church at Passo di Ligano. He issued a permit to build football pitches to one church. He continually worked through the church to keep control of his territory.
Vito Ciancimino's influence reached as far as Rome. According to his son, the mafia's favourite politician went there almost every month to deposit dirty money in the IOR, the Vatican Bank.
The IOR didn't impose any rules on transparency. The IOR did not give out any information. I saw vast amounts of money circulating in Vatican Bank safe deposit boxes and accounts. These were financial transactions to pay bribes both for politicians and for men linked to the world of the mafia.
Some have questioned how reliable a witness Massimo Ciancimino is, but prosecutors think he's trustworthy. After all, when it comes to mafia money, the Vatican Bank has 4. In fact, so much scandal has surrounded the IOR over the years that one of Pope Francis's first initiatives when he arrived in St. Peter's Square was to order a massive clean-up of its operations. As of 2015, the Vatican Bank has ended its relationship with 750 clients, and banking secrecy is being lifted. Vito Ciancimino was arrested in 1984, just as a new war was raging in Sicily. The fiercest of mafia clans had decided to take control of Cosa Nostra. In one bloody decade, over 1,000 people died. Mafia bosses, their soldiers and their relatives were ruthlessly cut down as the Corleonesi exterminated their rivals. And when anyone dared to stand up to the Mafia, they too were targeted. Magistrates, policemen, doctors, journalists and honest politicians were killed. Finally, in 1992, the crime bosses decided to rid themselves of their two most feared enemies, anti-mafia judges who'd been responsible for bringing many hundreds of mafiosi to justice, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino. The bombs that killed them 2 months apart also killed Falcone's wife and 8 brave bodyguards. Never had Cosa Nostra attacked the state with such flagrant brutality. Sicilians had had enough. And with the Cold War now over, the church's conscience began to stir.
This is Brancaccio, a Palermo suburb where in places there are third world levels of poverty. But it was here, after decades and decades of comfortable silence from the church, that one priest began to speak out. And in so doing, he made the Mafia fear him. His name was Father Pino Pugliese.
Ma noi speriamo che qualcosa via via vada cambiando. Già ci sono parecchi ragazzi che stanno attorno al centro sociale e alcuni già sono qui presenti e che incominciano a capire che la vita non è fatta semplicemente di violenza, di degrado, ma ci sono valori come pace, fraternità e collaborazione.
Gregorio Porcaro worked on these streets with Father Pugliese.
One day we saw Father Pugliese appear with his face all swollen because they'd beaten him up, punched him, threatening him. Some of our kids were threatened with knives. You need to stop talking to these priests. You need to come to us. These were very clear signals. When we saw the total lack of interest, almost the indifference of the church hierarchy, I would complain to Father Pugliese. We're being left on our own here. Maybe we're pushing it too far. Sooner or later, the Mafia is going to react. And he'd reply, what are you worried about? What can they do to us? Kill us? And if they kill us, what have they achieved?
The Sicilian church was at a crossroads. Communism had gone, and with it the political reasons for ignoring Cosa Nostra. But the church lacked Father Pugliese's clear vision of the Mafia as an evil, and failed to back him. John Paul II was much more decisive. In 1993 he went to Sicily and uttered a ringing condemnation. He was the first pope ever to mention the word Mafia.
Dio ha detto una volta, non uccidere, non può uomo, qualsiasi umana agglomerazione, mafia, non può cambiare e calpestare questo diritto santissimo di Dio. Lo dico ai responsabili, convertitevi, una volta verrà il giudizio di Dio.
Less than 2 months after John Paul II's speech, Cosa Nostra decided to teach a lesson to a church that it had previously regarded as an ally, or at least a passive onlooker. Bombs exploded outside 2 of the most important and beautiful churches in Rome. 2 months after that, the Mafia killed Don Pino Pugliese.
I believe we, the whole of Palermo, has been reborn from this man's blood. The next day, the whole city came here, because it was showing it was fed up with this cowardice, fed up with this abuse of power, this arrogance, fed up with this violence. And so the Mafia got it wrong. They thought they had shut him up, but what they did was enrage a whole city.
Don Pino Pugliese was beatified soon after Pope Francis became Pope.
Father Pugliese's murderers are behind bars now, but mobsters continue to occupy church pews, and their poisonous influence even reaches St. Peter's Square. Pope Benedict's staff knighted an 'ndrangheta boss, and the same boss managed to get his daughter baptised in this very basilica. It's stories like this that tell us, as they told Pope Francis, just how vulnerable the church still is to the wiles of organised crime.
The relationship between the church and the Mafia is merely one chapter of a much larger book entitled The Relationship Between the Church and Power. When, for example, in 1929, Pius XI signed the Concordat with the fascist state, the nature of fascism was already well known. When the Catholic Church signed the Concordat with Hitler's Germany in 1933, the anti-Semitic character of the Führer's policies was absolutely clear. When John Paul II went to Chile, he appeared on the balcony of General Pinochet's palace. It was clear to everybody what Pinochet had done. Therefore, the Church-Mafia relationship is relevant for Catholics far beyond the south of Italy. Changing the Church's relationship with power in that particular area of Italy would mean providing a great example for the relations between the Church and power in other parts of the world. The Pope may have excommunicated the Mafia, but I've come to see that many priests are still uncertain about what they're supposed to do about it.
The exasperating thing is that the church can make a real difference when it comes to fighting the mafias. For example, in 1993, when John Paul II condemned Cosa Nostra, a number of mobsters decided to renounce the life of crime and confess everything to the authorities. And thanks to those testimonies, prosecutors were able to strike at the heart of the mafia system.
Father Luigi Ciotti is the founder of what is today the largest association of mafia victims. Marginalised by his own church for decades, he knows something about the challenge that Pope Francis faces.
Today, as in the past, there are still signs that the church is too lukewarm in some places. Still today, there are those who only stand and watch, who always say it is up to someone else to take a stand. No, no, no. We are called upon to make our contribution to changing things. The church has to create the conditions, and this is what the Pope is doing, where we can be free to denounce the violence, the abuses, the arrogance of a system that continues to trample on people's dignity and liberty.
Pope Francis's battle will be won or lost, not in Rome, but in the south of Italy. Here, life is already hard for the few frontline priests who are taking the mafia on, and it could get even harder.
Well, this is not the kind of hill you'd want to come down with no brakes on your car. But up at the top here, the 'ndrangheta cut the brake cable of a van used to transport disabled people, precisely so that it would crash as it came down here. Now, why did they do that? The answer is a priest who is in the front line of the fight against organised crime.
There was a gun attack here on Easter Sunday. The evening of the previous Christmas, there was a bomb which blew up the entrance. The hole. This flew away. This was shattered. And on the first Sunday in Lent, they fired at the house. The police say that they do these things on holy days as a message to say that the priest is the target.
Don Panizza came to Calabria to work with disabled people. He took possession of an apartment confiscated by the state from a Mafia family. Nobody else would touch it. At first, not even the locksmith would come and change the locks. That's when the bombs came, and then the bullets. I've seen with my own eyes how the 'Ndrangheta watches his every move.
Yes, I'm scared. I'm really scared of them. But when I look at how they live, I always said to myself that I'd be more scared if I'd submitted to them. Because I see them living a life like that. I'd be much more scared living like that. Sure, I've got this fear day and night, even when I sleep. It affects my dreams. But life would be very different if I gave in to them.
Only recently, the door of Don Panizza's church was set on fire. His courage is an inspiration. It's men like him that are Pope Francis's elite soldiers in a battle against the Mafia.
For too long, Catholic clergy have been duped by the Mafia's false and insidious brand of piety. The Church has seen the Mafia as a political and financial ally, when it should have seen it as a mortal enemy. And whether out of fear, confused theology, or downright collusion, the Church has told gangsters just what they want to hear. But the people living under the Mafia's yoke are crying out to their Church for clarity. So priests, bishops, and the Pope himself must show every day that for the Mafia's forgiveness cannot come without justice. Living under the Mafia's yoke are crying out to their Church for clarity. So priests, bishops, and the Pope himself must show every day that for the Mafia's forgiveness cannot come without justice.